odds, probability, pot odds, and expected value. My objective in explaining these topics is to take something which appears to be complex to some players and make it simple. Every step is shown, and in some cases, to ensure ease of understanding, even the most obvious steps are going to be shown. If you already understand these topics, skip this lesson. If you're unsure, let's learn. This discussion will focus on limit, but when we get to no limit, the same principles will apply. The odds are 14 to 4. 14 to 4 is the way odds are said. Here's the way odds are written. We could express odds as odds for, that is how many times something will happen compared to how many times it won't happen, or as odds against, that is how many times something won't happen compared to how often it will happen. Poker people use odds against. The left-hand side of the 14 to 4, the 14, means how many times something won't happen compared to the right side, the 4, which means how often something will happen. Said another way, for every 18 times whatever we're talking about happens, it's not going to happen 14 times, and it's going to happen 4 times. To make the 14 to 4 easier to understand and use, we want to get the right-hand side to 1, so we know how many times something won't happen compared to the 1 time it's going to happen. We can divide both sides by the same number, and the odds don't change. To get the right-hand side to 1, and that's what we want, we divide the 4 by 4. But if we divide the right-hand side by 4, we also have to divide the left-hand side by 4. Take a look here. 14 divided by 4 and 4 divided by 4, which is the same as, which you see in front of you, which is equal to 3.5 to 1. The odds of 14 to 4 are the same as 3.5 to 1. But if it is an even fraction, most people don't say the odds are 3.5 to 1. They say it's 3.5 to 1. It won't happen 3.5 times for every 1 time it will happen. If you are a male and been married more than 20 years, your odds are 40 to 1. She's going to say no 40 times for every 1 time she says yes. The first number is how many times it won't happen compared to the second number, how many times it will happen. Incidentally, if you're a female and have been married more than 20 years, your odds are 0 to 1. He will say yes even though you haven't asked. Okay, now to cards. You have 2 cards in your hand and 2 more clubs hit on the flop. What are the odds against you catching another club on the turn? Remember, the left-hand side of odds is how many times something won't happen, and the right-hand side is how often it will happen. We want to find out how often we won't catch a club compared to how often we will catch a club. To find the left side, that is how often we won't catch a club, we need to find out how many cards won't help us make the club flush. How many cards won't help equals how many cards we don't know minus how many cards will help. So how many cards don't we know? We know the 2 in our hand, and we know the 3 that are on the board. So we know 5 cards. There are 52 cards in the deck minus the 5 that we know. So the number of cards we don't know is 47. How many cards will help? There are 13 clubs in the deck, and we know where 4 of them are. There are 2 in our hand, and there are 2 that are on the board. So there are 9 remaining clubs that will help. The left-hand side of odds, the number of cards that won't help, equals the 47 cards we don't know minus the 9 that will help. That equals 38 cards. Now let's find the right-hand side of odds, which is how often something will happen. That's the number of cards that will help us. We already calculated that a second ago. There are 9 cards that will help. So now we know both sides of the odds equation. 38 cards to 9 cards. We cancel out the word card, so we've got 38 to 9. And we want the right-hand side to be 1, and the reason we want it to be 1 so it's easy for us to understand how often something isn't going to happen compared to how often the 1 time it will happen. So we divide both sides by 9. 38 divided by 9, and the other side, 9 divided by 9, which is the same as 4.2 to 1. The odds against you catching a club on the turn are 4.2 to 1. The left-hand side, the 4.2, is how often you will not catch a club, compared to the right-hand side, the 1, which is how often you will catch a club. The left-hand side is how many times it won't happen, compared to the right-hand side, which is how often it will happen. Probability. Suppose you believe you have a 1 in 10 chance of winning a hand. To find the probability, you divide the chance you have of winning the hand by the total number of chances. In this case, chances of winning divided by total chances equals 1 divided by 10, and we often express that as a percent, 10%. Your probability of winning is 10%. That's what your probability is, your chance of winning.